and welcome to episode 47 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. On this edition of the podcast, I'm going to give you my perspective on Ben Simmons re-signing with the 76ers and the relevance of his decision to not play for the Australian national team, plus some perspective on why Cloak and Dagger failed in the television ratings and what it has to do with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D's move to the summertime, plus why Russell Westbrook and James Harden will work in Houston together. So let's open up a cold one and get started on episode 47 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on episode 47 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Multiple reports are out there that the 76ers have come to agreement to re-sign Ben Simmons on a 5-year contract extension worth $170 million at a maximum value. This is according to his agent, Rich Paul. This means Philadelphia has committed up to $580 million to Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Al Horford, and now Ben Simmons starting in 2020-2021 altogether. You're talking about a total of salaries for 4 players that you are banking on that those 4 players are going to put you into a position to not just be a contender, but be one of the best teams to win a championship. Not just contend, but win a championship. Ben Simmons is showing a commitment to the 76ers, and they are investing in him in return. I'm not going to say that playing for the Australian national team would have been a neglect of his responsibilities as a professional basketball player, but there is something to be said for the fact that at 22 years old, Ben Simmons is not a finished product. He still has a lot to develop in his game, not just as a basketball player on the court, but as a professional off the court. He needs to work on a consistent jump shot to add to his offensive skill set. He needs to become a more reliable free throw shooter. NBA history shows that players do not meet their true potential until they get to it past their 3rd year in the NBA and get 2 years, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Ben Simmons at 22 years old is only 2 full NBA playing seasons in the league. He is nowhere near where he can and will be in a few years. It does really himself no favors at this point in time to go play for the Australian national team, and it doesn't favor to the Sixers, who need Ben Simmons to have no excuses this offseason. You don't sign a player to this kind of money if you think that his attention and his commitment to being the best he can for your franchise is elsewhere. Last season, the 2018-19 season marked Ben Simmons' first All-Star appearance. Despite many people's excessive channeling of hate on social media for the 22-year-old, Ben Simmons did finish last season 9th in the NBA in minutes played, so he has shown the ability to be available and be on the court consistently. He was 3rd in the NBA in total assists, which means he is consistently getting the ball to other people's hands, and he's doing it at such a high rate that he is one of the best in the league. He is 8th in the NBA in steals per game, which means he is a dynamic force on the defensive end of the ball. And he had the 9th best defensive rating in the NBA among all players. Not just players at his particular position, 9th best in the entire league. So Ben Simmons, despite the fact that he doesn't have a jump shot, as people like to say, he is an impact player on the offensive end and the defensive end in a big way, and he's consistently on the floor being productive. You know, people get so excessive in their belief that certain players do not deserve the so-called max contract just because a singular person wouldn't pay a player all that money. But athletes are getting paid more and more, and there's a rising tide that's elevating players' pay. So while people may say they're not sure Ben Simmons deserves this money, I'm telling you that Ben Simmons needs to get this money now. Many times we don't look at the big picture of the long-term benefit of signing a player to a long-term contract. We only look at the short-term benefit and value for a team and for a franchise. One of the problems with the 76ers is that not all of their first-round picks have worked out. The 76ers did not invest a first overall pick in Ben Simmons just to get rid of him or trade him or whatever scenario some people may propagate out there. 76ers have had several first-round picks who have not worked out the way they had hoped From Michael Carter-Williams, to Nerlens Noel, to Jahlil Okafor, to Markelle Fultz, Sixers franchise history since 2012 has not been friendly to their ability to rebuild. They have been lucky to get Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. And while Ben Simmons is definitively behind Joel Embiid in development, Ben Simmons is also a couple of years younger than Joel Embiid. And Ben Simmons has not been training with NBA coaches for as long a period of time as Joel Embiid has. So Joel Embiid has a lot of advantages over Ben Simmons at this point in their lives. Just like Giannis Antetokounmpo took 6 years to reach the apex level, that is league MVP, Ben Simmons is only entering his third year, and he's still 3 years behind even Giannis. NBA history is full of players who did not meet their true potential until later in their career, and I think the Sixers were very smart to give Ben Simmons this contract now. When you give Ben Simmons this contract now, you're allowing him to work towards a maximum value of $170 million. Remember, the Sixers did a similar contract with Al Horford. He's guaranteed $97 million, but he can make up to $109 million if the team has certain level of postseason success. You have to think the 76ers put a similar tier of value in Ben Simmons' contract, also similar to Joel Embiid's contract, where he can make up to a certain number of millions of dollars if he hits certain delineations like All-NBA, League MVP, and etc. I would assume Ben Simmons has the same escalators in his contract. So it's not like the Sixers are just throwing away money. They're making these guys earn it. And I think at the end of the day, Ben Simmons will show to everyone that he is worth the contract that he has been given. Because I think Ben Simmons wants to be great. He wants to be successful. And a player who's third in the NBA in assists and eighth in steals at only 22 years old and the ninth best defensive rating in the league last year, he's not a bum. He's a phenomenally talented player. Does he need to develop a jump shot? Yes, he does. He needs to have that added to his repertoire. But just like Jason Kidd developed the jump shot throughout his career, just like Magic Johnson became a more consistent offensive threat outside of his ability to pass and drive to the basket, just like other great players with great skill sets developed into more well-rounded players, I think Ben Simmons can do the same thing. People just need to get over their lack of patience with the young man. Sixer fans should be more happy that Ben Simmons is working out than frustrated about his jump shot. A franchise that has had not one, not two, not three, but 4 high-level lottery first-round picks not work out for them. And they're complaining about the one guy who actually is working out for them. I think sometimes people need to count their blessings instead of what they want the player to be. There's a big difference between criticism and irrational hatred. And I think that just as we saw Kawhi Leonard develop into a shooter, just as we saw Jason Kidd develop into a shooter, I think Ben Simmons can as well. Let's see if year 3 is the year that he makes that step. Now, if he doesn't make that step in year 3, there will be consequences. But actually, it's impressive that he was third in the NBA in total assists for a guy who can't shoot, right? Topic number 2 on episode 47 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. As we do on the podcast, I like to discuss some of the different television shows that exist in the Marvel and DC universes. And on this episode, I want to touch on the massive ratings hit that Cloak and Dagger took and what it has to do with the other Marvel television shows and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Just to give a tiny little bit of background, Cloak and Dagger is a show that's on Freeform. It's in season 2 of the show. It follows 2 teenagers who are imbued with a special level of powers in the city of New Orleans. And in their journey to learn about them powers and learn about themselves, they try to help people along the way. Cloak and Dagger were 2 characters developed in Marvel Comics back in the 1980s, and their original introduction in the comics was more of a counterweight to the morality play that is Spider-Man and other superheroes and their extreme views that they need to kill all drug dealers. Well, thankfully in the television show, they did not take that path. But in the television show, they did have some positive momentum in the first season. But season 2 took a major step backward in the ratings and viewership. That dip is a reflection of a larger conundrum for Marvel and Disney moving forward. Season 2 of Cloak and Dagger is right now the flagship example of the one thing that Marvel and Disney does not have right. Season 2 averaged 217,000 fewer viewers per episode than last year on linear television, and also saw a dip of 30% in digital viewership for Cloak and Dagger. Disney has made a $1 billion level investment in the movie and digital streaming areas of their media empire. There is a growing disconnect with the other Marvel properties, a disconnect that started 40 years ago following season 2 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this disconnect has affected every aspect of the Marvel label. There's a belief right now in media that if you slap the name Marvel on something, it's going to be successful because the movies have been these monster successes, these $1 billion return on investments. But the reality is that just because you put a Marvel name on it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. And there have been a couple of failed ventures in the small screen versus the big screen. Marvel executives sold audiences over a decade ago, saying that their movies and television shows that everything is connected. They wanted to have this expanding universe similar to what they have in the comics for over the last 50 years. And they wanted to have shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and other Marvel properties all have a interconnection to the movies. And at the beginning, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was doing that. They were filling in some of the gaps between the movies. They were a bridge of content. They helped bring some of the concepts and points that were brought into the movies and explain them further on the television show. But starting with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 3, the TV properties took a very different turn and direction than their movie counterparts. The short-term success of the Netflix shows further drove home the point of the separation of church and state, or in this case, the separation of small and big screen. The properties rarely had content that was connected to each other, defeating the original purpose of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the promises of Marvel executives. It was season 3 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was one of the first times that Marvel was introducing content and characters that had nothing to do or very little to do with the movies themselves. The introduction of the Inhumans, the Kree Empire, and other long-known Marvel concepts into a television show without first giving them further explanation in the movies and then loosely connecting them were the first steps of this separation that I call a separation of church and state. The full extent for why there was a separation of church and state is not fully clear or ever been fully explained by anyone at Marvel or Disney, but there are some warning signs that we probably should have seen ahead of time before we got to this point here in 2019. To start with, the Netflix television shows the Defenders characters, the New York-based city heroes like Luke Cage, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, along with the Punisher, despite their early success, quickly took a back seat when Marvel reached their agreement with Sony to bring Spider-Man into the MCU. You see, the original plan was to bring these characters to the Netflix screen, and with their success, the idea was in Infinity War to link the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe and television universe together in a way that would make a cohesive storyline and a cohesive bridge across all platforms and allow for the gap between Avengers movies to have more substance and relevance to those television shows. The idea of Big Brother helping Little Brother. The problem was that the street level heroes on Netflix became an afterthought when one of Marvel's most famous characters took the center stage. It was around the time that Spider-Man Homecoming was ramping up their promotion for the summer blockbuster that year that rumors began of Disney looking for other options with Marvel's other properties that had been taken from them, specifically the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. Those rumors should have probably told all of us who are fans or people in the media that Marvel was going to phase out these Netflix characters who, for a short time, did extremely well. Seasons 1 and 2 of Daredevil, Season 1 of Jessica Jones, Season 1 of Luke Cage, all did extremely well. Even Season 1 of Iron Fist, despite a lot of the criticism by people online, did fairly well in viewership to the point where there was given a second season, and then before that, the crossover miniseries called The Defenders, which tied up a lot of the loose ends of the previous seasons of the show. That short-term success on Netflix didn't seem to parlay them to ever be able to be a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe on a larger scale. And one could argue that the neglect of the connect between the Marvel movies and the Marvel Netflix shows may have further driven the gap between the hardcore comic book viewer and the Netflix viewer, and the Netflix viewer couldn't make up enough ground. Now, Marvel and Fox, a few years earlier, before 2017 and 18, came to an agreement to share the character of Quicksilver with two different actors playing different versions of the same speedster, but in totally different universes. You had Quicksilver introduced in X-Men Days of Future Past, and then you had the MCU version of Quicksilver introduced in Marvel's Avengers Age of Ultron. There were rumors and speculation that because of the success of that relationship, plus the Marvel agreement with Sony, that there could be a crossover for other X-Men characters who were under the Fox label. Specifically, fans clamoring for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine to make his way to an Avengers film. Yet it came more and more clear that Disney had a bigger game in play. The opportunity to buy 21st Century Fox made the idea of cooperation fade away. The billion-dollar takeover was probably in the works for 2 to 3 years before the deal actually ever happened. And I would even argue that possibly Disney had talked to Marvel about the potential of a hostile takeover of Fox by terms of billions of dollars as far back as 2015. The reason why I say 2015 is because 2015 was when Marvel used Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in their third season to introduce audiences to the Inhumans and angle them as a replacement for mutants in Marvel's TV and movie universes. Remember, in the comics, Daisy Johnson's character, superhero Quake, in the comics, she's a mutant. On Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., she's an Inhuman. That was the first step, along with the explanation of Kree history, Inhuman history, and Hydra history that was being fleshed out on the television show in seasons 3 and 4. There were plans for an Inhumans movie, which then later became a television show, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was supposed to be the catalyst for this introduction. I think once Marvel and Sony came to their deal, the reality of the Quicksilver agreement made Marvel less interested in developing the Inhumans and set their sights on the larger prize beyond Spider-Man, the prize which is the X-Men and the first family of Marvel Comics, the Fantastic Four. The Inhumans are small bit players in all of this. Marvel has always wanted to get the biggest names of their properties back under their umbrella. For those who don't know, the reason why Fox had the rights to these characters, or why Universal has the rights to the Hulk and Namor the Submariner, their television distribution rights, why Sony had Spider-Man, Fox had the rights to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, is because in the late 90s, Marvel avoided bankruptcy by selling these television distribution rights and certain TV distribution rights to these different studios. Marvel has a long history of leasing the rights to their characters to different outfits. This goes back to the 1960s when Marvel leased the rights to their characters for cartoons, in the 70s for movies and television shows, in the 80s for more cartoons and more movies, and then in the 90s there were supposed to be other television shows and movies as well. Marvel has a long history of this leasing and handout, but in the 1990s, they needed a desperate influx of cash. So they went further than they ever did before, basically almost forfeiting their right to ever get these characters back to these studios. So Marvel looked at the opportunity to buy 21st Century Fox and continue to have success with Spider-Man as a way to keep what was previously theirs long term. But this led to the neglect of the television properties. The whole point is that the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe is supposed to be connected, and that the television properties no longer had continuity with the movies. which opened the door for the writers and the producers of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Netflix shows not have to worry about the movies they're doing and just exist in their own universe. The ultimate failure that led at the end of the day was the Inhumans. The absolute failure that was the mini television show that was originally supposed to be a movie that Marvel kicked to the TV show because they had hopes of possibly bigger game to hunt. And the failure of the Inhumans television show, plus the decrease of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ratings, along with the decrease in viewership of some of the Netflix shows, led to these characters being overlooked and audiences to go elsewhere. The television shows became overlooked and the quality of the shows took a hit, and audiences noticed, especially when Big Brother, the movies, ignored Little Brother. Season 2 of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. averaged just under 5 million viewers per episode on linear television, on-demand, DVR, and digital viewers. By season 5, the show averaged just over 2 million per episode, a drastic decline that almost led the show to be canceled. You lose about 3 million viewers, you got some problems. Well, season 6 has salvaged some of the viewership, an increase of an average of 200,000 more viewers per episode. While by the big picture, that might not be a huge uptick, any uptick is a positive when it comes to the rise of viewership. And part of it has to do with ABC and everybody involved, Marvel, Disney, everybody agreeing that it was time to take Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in a different direction. That direction was out of the fall-spring calendar. We live in a world where HBO, Showtime, Netflix, Hulu, CBS, ABC, CBS, Fox, USA, TNT. I can keep going on and on. All these networks, AMC, they're fighting for your viewership. They're all competing, and the big time of year to compete for your viewership is during the fall and spring. The least appealing times of the year is typically winter because there's a lot of holidays involved, and the summer because a lot of people go on vacation and there's less people sitting in front of their television because it's nice outside. The idea for Marvel to move Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to the summer was, in one part, a last-ditch effort to see if the show can be successful, but was also a reflection of what Cloak and Dagger did in season 1. You see, Cloak and Dagger had very good success for the first several episodes of season 1, while making small connections to the Netflix Marvel shows, as well as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., referencing characters and using different concepts from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., such as the Darkhold, as a pivot point for the protagonist's source of their powers. But the season 1 finale had a major viewership hit, a decrease of 21% from the previous week's episode, in a season low 425,000 viewers across all platforms. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. people knew that they had 5 seasons of equity built up with an audience, and they had a viewership that would be probably more interested in waiting around for the summer than having to compete with other shows they may be interested in on television. And if they waited for after Avengers Endgame, they assumed that they would have success. Well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has had success, and there's talk that the show has not just been renewed for one more season, but multiple seasons beyond this summer. Literally moving the show from the fall-spring calendar to the summer calendar has not just saved the show, but given it a little bit new life, especially with the subject matter that's brought into the show. Subject matter that, while it has nothing to do with the movies, it is a fun twist on the Marvel Universe in different concepts, in a way that I think could open the door for the show to maybe reintegrate itself with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because now that you have Avengers Endgame opening the door for alternate timelines, alternate realities, and a multiverse, you can just argue that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. exists in a different universe, a different entity of the multiverse compared to the movies, instead of having to worry about how it relates to each other. Well, Cloak and Dagger made a change themselves. They didn't follow in the footsteps of season 1's schedule. While season 1 started on June 7th, season 2 debuted April 4th, 2 months earlier, and right in the heart of the spring TV programming schedule. You see, Freeform made an incorrect assumption, they could pick up viewership from the wave that was Avengers Endgame coming along and scoop up some of the scattered audiences of the CW Arrowverse fans, who their own shows had inconsistent schedules and major gaps, making fans wait 2, 3, 4 weeks at times for different show arcs to resume and continue. This programming calculation by Freeform and the people involved in Cloak and Dagger showed that they failed on multiple fronts, as the show averaged under 400,000 viewers per episode, took a 39% dip in viewership from year 1 to year 2. Again, people not learning from their mistakes and the show's suffering, because at the end of the day, Cloak and Dagger had nothing to do to place themselves on the wave that was Avengers Endgame. What on earth is Cloak and Dagger doing that has anything to do with the movie? Absolutely nothing. They failed to follow up on any connections to the Netflix Marvel characters they had established in season 1, and only the diehard fans could decipher what any connections there were to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. moving forward. Again, the Marvel Studios' absence of support for their cousins on television was hard to digest for audiences who loved the movies and had fewer and fewer reasons to consume the content of their characters and adopted siblings on television. At the end of the day, if you're a diehard movie fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you don't care about Cloak and Dagger. You have very little interest in anything invested in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And at the end of the day, the Netflix television shows feel like they're just like Fox, basically a whole nother entity separate from the movies. The Netflix shows have been being phased out, in part because Disney's preparing to launch Disney Plus, the streaming service, and slowly they're removing the Marvel content from the Netflix and moving it over to Disney Plus over the next few years, cycling Netflix away from the Disney and Marvel content and exclusively putting on Disney Plus. Also, Disney now owns Hulu and is investing in that platform's programming lineup, even brokering a deal with Comcast, NBC Universal on a deal that will stream Hulu on Xfinity's X1 platform. So now you're going to have Disney Plus and Hulu directly competing with Netflix. So why on earth would Marvel want their characters on Netflix anymore? So their lack of support has forced Netflix to say, why should we invest all these resources in these shows and these characters? Iron Fist was abruptly canceled, especially mishandled in that second season with a bizarre ending, and realistically nobody really knows what the heck that show was even going with the direction at that point anyway. The final of Luke Cage was so open-ended that anybody could pick up that show for season 3 and totally change the direction and it not affect any of the past history of the show. The Daredevil ending of that show was in many ways depressing and extremely unsatisfying. Shows like The Punisher and Jessica Jones don't have big picture links to anybody else in the Marvel universe, so however they wanted to end Punisher or Jessica Jones is not going to affect anyone, especially if Marvel does what the rumors are out there in Hollywood, that they are going to move some of these Netflix hero characters over to the Disney Plus platform at some point. These two strikes against Netflix, along with Marvel no longer interested in development or support of these Netflix superheroes, led Netflix to no longer support the shows as well. Marvel has promised that all TV and movie content will be available in Disney Plus in the very near future, along with new TV shows with direct connections to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This makes the shows on Netflix, Freeform, and ABC obsolete, making all the characters basically bastards in a whole world in the multiverse that may or may not have anything to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in all likelihood we'll probably never see those characters interact with the popular counterparts ever again or be featured in any other aspect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Disney Plus universe. Cloak and Dagger has a small following, a viewership that is smaller than any of the CW Arrowverse shows. In fact, even the least watched CW Arrowverse show, DC Legends of Tomorrow, averages between 200,000 and 400,000 more viewers per episode than Cloak and Dagger, on a television network that I don't think some people still fully are sure what channel it's on. They just know what channel it's on because either they set their DVR or their favorites lineup so they can go to it each week. The CW shows have years and years of building of their character lineup, and all the shows support each other in a small universe. Something that Cloak and Dagger has no support network on their network or from anyone else. A show like Krypton has a deep storyline and a lot of substance to work with, and they don't need the support of another television show or another entity. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been on television for 6 seasons. That's built up equity with their audience. Freeform only has one superhero show and has been kicked to the curb by audiences while being ignored by Marvel, its originator. The Cloak and Dagger producers and Freeform executives took two major risks. Both chances did more harm than good. The lesson to be learned here, like the Inhumans, like the Netflix properties, is that having the Marvel name in your show is not good enough. You have to deliver good content, good stories, or audiences will dismiss you altogether. Marvel promised audiences almost a decade ago that everything is connected, but the lack of connectivity, the on-off support of these shows will not just doom Cloak and Dagger, but will doom any Marvel property that is not a part of either the MCU directly or Disney Plus starting at the end of 2019. Cloak and Dagger's future is sealed, just like the fates of the Inhumans, Luke Cage, and other shows. Cloak and Dagger may be renewed for next year, but I don't expect it to survive beyond that. With Disney's investment in Disney Plus, Hulu, and the billions of dollars spent on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's where their money is, that's where their value is. The side projects and the side investments and the allowances that they have given Freeform and ABC and Netflix are going to slowly fade away to the point where if you are a fan of Marvel Comics or you are a fan of what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is doing, you might as well just ignore all those other shows. And it's a shame because Cloak and Dagger had promise. The Netflix shows were doing well for a short time. And Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is probably going to survive despite the huge hits they took in seasons 4 and 5. But these other shows, I doubt they're going to survive long term. And it's because there is no connectivity anymore to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. These shows are basically the black sheep stepsisters and stepbrothers of the big time shows and the big time movies. Topic number 3 on this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, back together in a Rockets uniform. The deal happened just over last weekend. Westbrook traded to Houston in exchange for Chris Paul. I know there's a lot of speculation. Is this going to work? There's a lot of detractors when it comes to Russell Westbrook. A lot of people don't like his game. They don't like his style of play. I know I have been called a James Harden hater. So a lot of people would assume that I'm going to decry this deal. But I think this deal is a genius move by the Rockets and is not just going to better their team, but I think the Rockets right now are better equipped to compete for and win an NBA championship than they were previously. And here's why. Number one, Russell Westbrook is younger than Chris Paul. Russell Westbrook turns 31 in November. Chris Paul is already 34. So you have a player who is already younger than his counterpart. Number two, Chris Paul has missed 77 games over the last 4 regular seasons, where Russell Westbrook has only missed 14 games. So since 2015 and 2016, those 4 seasons up until now, Russell Westbrook has been on the court, he has been available, and he has played at a high level for his team, while Chris Paul has not. So one player can't stay on the court and can't stay healthy, and he's older. The other player's on the court more often, and he's 3 years younger. So the Rockets already upgraded in the department of availability and of youth in a way that is not going to compromise them long term. When Russell Westbrook gets to the end of his contract, he's going to be 34 years old, the same age that Chris Paul is now. And him at 34 is probably going to have a lot less wear and tear on his legs and his body than Chris Paul. Whereas Chris Paul in 4 years is going to be 38, and I'm not 100% sure if he's even going to be an all-star caliber player by then anymore. CP3 is on the downside of his career. Yes, the guy's a future Hall of Famer. He deserves all the respect in the world, but let's be realistic. When a player starts having diminishing returns, it's hard for him to salvage anything else in his career. It doesn't matter who the player is, what position you want to go to. When Jason Kidd started slowing down, or when Scottie Pippen started slowing down, any player who is a guy who has played for as long and as a high level as Chris Paul, at some point there's going to be diminished returns, and Father Time has beaten everybody. Russell Westbrook over the last 4 seasons has averaged 10.4 assists per game, while Chris Paul's average is 8.9 over the same stretch. Westbrook has a higher value over a replacement player than Chris Paul has. Such a high value that Russell Westbrook is actually, according to analytics, one of the most valuable players in the NBA, compared to Chris Paul, who is a valuable player but does not have an extreme high value like Russell Westbrook does. So you have two players who are very different places in their career. So the Rockets are getting a better player who is more productive at this point in his life and career. Now, I know what some people may be thinking. They may be saying, but Josh, you're not answering the question. How are Westbrook and Harden going to play well together? To me, it's very simple. We are in a league where there are multiple ball handlers. We saw Chris Paul and James Harden take turns being the primary ball handler for the Rockets. We've seen the Warriors. We saw the Raptors this year. We've seen multiple teams around the NBA have multiple ball handlers, and those are the most successful teams. What you're basically going to do is ask Harden or Westbrook to play off the ball more often than not. That's all. You're not asking one guy to take over the other guy's role. I think Russell Westbrook is aware that the Rockets are Harden's team. I think Harden is aware that Westbrook is a highly competitive player. These are two men who have known each other since their teenage years. They're very familiar with each other's personalities, their games, their mentalities. And yes, they used to play together. Well, that was at different points in their careers. The familiarity is something that can help them develop their on-court relationship at this point in their careers where they're both former NBA MVPs. This is a huge blessing in disguise for James Harden because this is a guy who had to carry a basketball team that was so riddled with injuries last year. The reason why he was putting up that ridiculously long streak of consecutive games scoring at least 30 points was because there was almost nobody else on the roster to score. He was depending on guys like Austin Rivers and Kenneth Faried to help him score points. Two guys that on most teams are not even getting starter level minutes. On most NBA teams, Kenneth Faried is probably playing about 12 minutes a game, and Austin Rivers playing 16 to 20 max minutes per game. But with Chris Paul and Clint Capella and others injured last year, James Harden by himself had to carry a basketball team in a way that he will not have to do with Russell Westbrook on the court. And they could actually have Harden not even be the primary ball handler anymore. Westbrook can be the primary ball handler, and you can have Harden play off of Westbrook. Harden's the better shooter of the two players. Harden is the higher volume scorer of the two players. So why not let Westbrook be the facilitator and Harden be the scorer? Westbrook has shown in his career his willingness to defer to Paul George, to Kevin Durant, and other players at the highest levels and in the biggest moments. He's unafraid to pass the ball. He is not a selfish player by nature. And James Harden has shown himself not to be a ball hog either, despite the fact that he does take a lot of shots every game, and he does not get the stats that he gets without being a high volume scorer, a guy who takes a lot of shots to get a lot of points. At the end of the day, Harden has been among the leaders in the NBA in total assists and assists per game every year in the last 3 to 4 years. In fact, if you go back 5 years, you realize that James Harden has one of the best assist ratios, the points scored off of passes, of anybody in the league. So when he passes the ball, guys are usually scoring off of those passes. You know who else is among the best in the NBA at that stat? Russell Westbrook. You have two players who, when they pass the ball, more often than not, the guy is going to score. I think this is a relationship that's going to work out well. I think these are two guys who are going to get along beautifully in a way that Chris Paul and James Harden couldn't. Because Chris Paul and James Harden were from two totally different worlds in how they treat the game of basketball, how they look at themselves, how they look at their teammates. Russell Westbrook and Harden have a very similar goal. And when you have a similar end game, you're going to have similar success. When you're around the same age, you have the same motivations, it's easier for two individuals to garner success. Westbrook and Harden both understand their place in the league right now. And their place in the league is they're two of the few superstars in the league that do not have an NBA ring, that have been to the NBA Finals but haven't been back. They are going to put aside any ego that may be left in their bones to try to get this done together. They have a window of 3 to 4 years to make it happen. LeBron James and Anthony Davis are not going to be at their apex this coming year, especially having to learn to play together, having never played together before. You have the Warriors taking a major step back with the injury to Klay Thompson. You have the Eastern Conference basically going to send what some people believe a sacrificial lamb to the Western Conference. And the Western Conference is going to cannibalize each other. So when you get to the postseason, it's not as much about what seed you have. It's about how do you take advantage of the matchup in front of you. And I think a Westbrook-Harden backcourt with Harden's desire to prove everybody wrong, with Westbrook's tenacity and competitive nature, Harden's willingness to practice and learn how to play with others, along with Westbrook's unselfish nature that he has shown over the years, the combination of those two is going to have a huge impact on this league. I think part of the reason why a lot of people have been critical of Westbrook and Harden over the years, myself included, is because of the fact that it's frustrating for us as sports analysts and fans to understand how two players with as much talent as they have, because their teams are not well-equipped around them. When Westbrook has averaged triple-doubles in back-to-back years, it's not because he's a ball hog or a stat sheet stuffer per se. It's because he has to get those points and those rebounds and assists for his team to be successful. James Harden wasn't scoring 30 points plus per game for all those games in a row because he's a jerk. He's doing it because he had to. The criticism of the players wasn't them specifically. It was the fact that it was an understanding that the style of play that they were doing to be successful was not sustainable to win a championship. Well, guess what? Now that they're reunited in Houston, they don't have to play that style of basketball anymore. And I think Houston, allowing them to keep Eric Gordon and keep PJ Tucker and keep Clint Capella instead of trading them away in some bloated trade that would have landed Jimmy Butler in Houston, is a blessing in disguise. You have two players who want to play together in a system by Mike D'Antoni that enables players to be themselves and especially elevates guards. Let's remember, this is a guy in Mike D'Antoni who has been successful at making Steve Nash a two-time league MVP. A guy who put Jeremy Lin on the platform to have Lin Sanity take over the league almost a decade ago. He's a guy who made Chris Duhon a good functional point guard in the NBA. This is a guy like Mike D'Antoni that took James Harden, a guy that nobody thought could be a primary ball handler, and made him into one of the leading assist guys in the NBA. Mike D'Antoni's not perfect, but he does have a specific skill that he is great at, and that is making guards better than they already were. Can you imagine a league where Harden and Westbrook are both better than they were last year? That's just one of many reasons why this reunion is going to work. Watch out, because when you look at the Western Conference, the Clippers may be the favorite on paper. The Nuggets and the Blazers are going to be great because they have continuity. The Lakers have a guy named LeBron James who's still one of the best players on the planet. And the Warriors still have Steph Curry. But the Rockets have not one, but two league MVPs on their roster. And they're coming, not just for the Western Conference title, but for the NBA title. And I'm absolutely fascinated to see how great these guys can be together when they had to work so hard separately. What's going to happen when they don't have to work as hard to carry a basketball team when they both can share the burden on the court this coming season? It's going to be great to watch. Thanks for listening to episode 47 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you enjoy the content I bring you each and every week on the podcast, especially this episode, why don't you drop your thoughts and comments in the section below and hit that like button and subscribe as I each episode bring you my perspectives on the worlds of sports and comic movies and television shows. I'm your host, Josh Hennig, and I'll catch you right here for the next edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast.